America is the greatest nation in the history of the world, renowned for its unwavering commitment to equality, democracy, and freedom. From its founding, the United States has stood as a beacon of hope and strength, a country built on the ideals of liberty and justice for all. Throughout its storied history, America has faced countless challenges and engaged in numerous conflicts, often emerging victorious and reaffirming its place as a global leader. These victories have shaped the nation's identity, solidifying its reputation as a formidable force on the world stage. Yet, even the most powerful nations experience moments of struggle and setback. While America's triumphs are well celebrated, the rare instances where the nation has faced defeat are less frequently discussed. These moments, though fewer in number, are no less significant. They offer valuable lessons and a deeper understanding of the complexities of war and the costs of conflict. 1812 to 1815, the War of 1812. The War of 1812, spanning from 1812 to 1815, was a complex and multifaceted conflict between the United States and Great Britain. At its core, the war was fueled by the young nation's desire to assert its independence on the global stage, challenge British maritime practices, and expand its territory into Canada. However, the war did not unfold as the United States had hoped. The British naval blockade severely hampered American trade, and the attempts to invade Canada were met with staunch resistance and failed to achieve their objectives. Despite the early enthusiasm, the United States found itself struggling to gain the upper hand in a war that would eventually end in a stalemate. The most significant blow to American morale during the War of 1812 came in August of 1814, when British forces invaded Washington, D.C., and set fire to the White House and other public buildings. This brazen attack not only demonstrated the vulnerability of the American capital, but also symbolized the inability of the United States to protect its own territory from foreign invasion. The burning of Washington, D.C., left an indelible mark on the nation's psyche, and although the British withdrew shortly afterward, the damage had been done. The event became a powerful reminder of the limitations of the United States' military capabilities at the time. As the war dragged on, both sides grew weary of the conflict. The United States, lacking the resources to sustain a prolonged war effort, faced increasing pressure to seek a resolution. The British, preoccupied with the ongoing Napoleonic Wars in Europe, were also eager to bring the conflict in North America to a close. The Treaty of Ghent, signed on December 24, 1814, officially ended the War of 1812. The treaty essentially restored the status quo ante bellum, with no significant territorial changes and no clear victor. While the treaty ended the hostilities, it did not address many of the underlying issues that had led to the war, such as maritime rights and impressment. In the aftermath of the War of 1812, the United States was left to grapple with the implications of the conflict. Although the war had not resulted in any significant territorial gains, it did contribute to a growing sense of national identity and pride. The successful defense of Baltimore and the subsequent writing of The Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key became symbols of American resilience. However, the war also exposed the weaknesses of the nation's military and the need for stronger defenses. The conflict underscored the challenges of waging war against a more powerful and experienced adversary and highlighted the importance of diplomacy in resolving international disputes. In reflecting on the War of 1812, it is evident that while the United States did not achieve its primary objectives, the conflict played a crucial role in shaping the nation's future. The war served as a catalyst for the development of a more robust military and a more assertive foreign policy. It also reinforced the idea that the United States could stand up to European powers, even if the outcomes were not always as intended. The War of 1812, despite its challenges and setbacks, became a defining moment in American history, contributing to the nation's evolution and its place in the world. 1817 to 1818, the First Seminole War. The First Seminole War, which took place between 1817 and 1818, was a conflict that highlighted the complexities of United States expansionism and the challenges of military engagement in difficult terrain. The war arose from the United States' desire to exert control over Florida, a territory that was then under Spanish rule. but had become a refuge for runaway slaves and a stronghold for the Seminole people. The United States government, under the leadership of General Andrew Jackson, sought to eliminate the Seminole threat and secure the region for American interests. However, the war would prove to be a difficult and costly endeavor. General Jackson's campaign into Florida was marked by aggressive military tactics and a determination to subdue the Seminole people. Jackson's forces launched a series of attacks on Seminole villages, burning homes and crops, and driving the inhabitants into the swamps and forests. Despite these efforts, the Seminoles proved to be formidable opponents, using their knowledge of the terrain to conduct guerrilla warfare against the United States forces. The dense swamps and thick forests of Florida provided the Seminoles with natural defenses, making it difficult for the United States military to achieve a decisive victory. The First Seminole War became a drawn-out conflict, with both sides suffering significant losses. The war also had significant political implications. Jackson's actions in Florida, including the unauthorized seizure of Spanish forts and the execution of British subjects accused of aiding the Seminoles, sparked international controversy. The Spanish government protested Jackson's invasion of their territory, and the British were outraged by the execution of their citizens. The United States government, while officially distancing itself from some of Jackson's more extreme actions, ultimately supported his efforts to secure Florida. The conflict demonstrated the lengths to which the United States was willing to go to achieve its expansionist goals, even at the risk of international condemnation. Despite the challenges and controversies, the First Seminole War ultimately resulted in the United States gaining control over Florida. The war forced Spain to recognize its inability to defend the territory and led to the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, in which Spain ceded Florida to the United States. However, the war also exposed the difficulties of subduing the Seminole people, many of whom remained in Florida despite the United States military's efforts to remove them. The First Seminole War was a precursor to further conflicts between the United States and the Seminole people, as the United States government continued its efforts to remove Native American populations from desirable lands. In the aftermath of the First Seminole War, the United States faced the challenge of consolidating its control over Florida. The war had demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Seminole people, who would continue to resist United States attempts to relocate them in the years to come. The conflict also highlighted the limitations of military force in achieving the United States government's objectives, as the swamps and forests of Florida proved to be formidable obstacles to conventional warfare. The First Seminole War was a reminder that the United States' expansionist ambitions would not be easily realized, and that the pursuit of these goals would often come at a high cost. 1835 to 1842, the Second Seminole War. The Second Seminole War, lasting from 1835 to 1842, was one of the most protracted and costly conflicts in American history. It was part of a broader effort by the United States to remove Native American populations from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States and relocate them to territories west of the Mississippi River. The war was sparked by the United States government's attempts to enforce the Treaty of Payne's Landing, which required the Seminoles to leave Florida and settle in Indian Territory. However, the Seminoles, led by the charismatic Chief Osceola, refused to comply with the treaty, leading to a brutal and drawn-out conflict. The United States military faced significant challenges in its efforts to remove the Seminoles from Florida. The Seminoles, familiar with the terrain, employed guerrilla tactics that made it difficult for the United States forces to achieve a decisive victory. The dense swamps, forests, and rivers of Florida provided natural defenses that the Seminoles used to their advantage, launching surprise attacks on United States troops and then retreating into the wilderness. The war became a frustrating and costly endeavor for the United States, with no clear end in sight. The United States military's inability to quickly subdue the Seminoles led to widespread criticism and growing public discontent with the conflict. The Second Seminole War was also marked by significant human suffering. The United States government's efforts to forcibly remove the Seminoles from Florida resulted in the displacement of thousands of Native Americans, many of whom died from disease, starvation, and exposure during their journey to Indian Territory. The war also took a heavy toll on United States soldiers, who faced harsh conditions in the swamps and forests of Florida, as well as deadly encounters with the Seminoles. The conflict highlighted the brutal realities of the United States government's policy of Indian removal and the lengths to which it was willing to go to achieve its goals. Despite the high cost and the lengthy duration of the war, the United States military eventually succeeded in forcing the majority of the Seminoles to leave Florida. However, the victory was incomplete, as a small group of Seminoles managed to remain in the remote regions of the Everglades, where they continued to resist United States control. The Second Seminole War ended in 1842 with the United States government declaring victory. But the conflict left a lasting legacy of bitterness and resentment among the Seminole people. The war also exposed the limitations of United States military power and the challenges of waging war in difficult and unfamiliar terrain. In the years following the Second Seminole War, the United States continued its efforts to remove Native American populations from their lands. But the conflict in Florida remained a stark reminder of the challenges and costs of such policies. The war had demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Seminole people, who had fought fiercely to defend their homeland. It also underscored the moral and ethical dilemmas of the United States government's policy of Indian removal, which resulted in the suffering and displacement of thousands of Native Americans. The Second Seminole War was a painful chapter in American history, one that would have lasting consequences for both the Seminole people and the United States. 1950 to 1953, the Korean War. The Korean War, which took place from 1950 to 1953, was a significant conflict in the Cold War era, marking the first military engagement between the forces of communism and the Western democracies led by the United States. The war began when North Korean forces, backed by the Soviet Union and China, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea in June 1950. The United States, under the banner of the United Nations, quickly intervened to support South Korea, viewing the conflict as a crucial test of its policy of containment against the spread of communism. However, what began as a limited military engagement soon escalated into a full-scale war with no clear resolution. The Korean War was characterized by intense and often brutal fighting, as the front lines shifted back and forth across the Korean peninsula. United States forces, along with their United Nations allies, initially struggled to repel the North Korean invasion, but a successful amphibious landing at Incheon in September 1950 turned the tide of the war. However, the entry of Chinese forces into the conflict in late 1950 brought a new level of intensity to the fighting, leading to a protracted and bloody stalemate. The war's harsh winter conditions, rugged terrain, and well-entrenched enemy forces made it one of the most challenging conflicts the United States had ever faced. Despite significant military efforts, the Korean War ultimately ended in a stalemate. The armistice signed on July 27, 1953, brought an end to the fighting, but did not result in a formal peace treaty. The Korean peninsula remained divided along the 38th parallel, with North Korea under communist control and South Korea under the protection of the United States and its allies. The war left a deep impact on the Korean people, with millions of lives lost and the country devastated by years of conflict. For the United States, the Korean War was a sobering reminder of the complexities of Cold War geopolitics and the limitations of military power in achieving political goals. The legacy of the Korean War continues to be felt today, as the Korean Peninsula remains one of the most volatile regions in the world. The conflict established the precedent for United States involvement in future Cold War conflicts, such as the Vietnam War, where the United States would again find itself fighting against communist forces in a faraway land. The Korean War also had significant implications for United States military strategy, leading to a more permanent and robust military presence in East Asia and the expansion of the United States defense budget. The war highlighted the challenges of waging a limited war in an era of nuclear weapons, where the risk of escalation to a global conflict was ever present. In reflecting on the Korean War, it is clear that while the United States succeeded in preventing the spread of communism to South Korea, the conflict did not achieve a decisive victory. The war ended in a stalemate, with the status quo largely unchanged, and the human and economic costs were enormous. The Korean War remains a complex and often overlooked chapter in American history, one that underscores the difficulties of achieving military and political objectives in a divided and polarized world. The war's legacy continues to shape United States foreign policy and military strategy, as the lessons learned in Korea are applied to modern conflicts and challenges. 1955 to 1975, the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, which lasted from 1955 to 1975, stands as one of the most contentious and polarizing conflicts in American history. The war was rooted in the broader context of the Cold War, as the United States sought to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia by supporting the government of South Vietnam against the communist forces of North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. However, what began as a limited advisory mission quickly escalated into a full-scale war, with the United States deploying hundreds of thousands of troops to Vietnam and committing significant military resources to the conflict. Despite this massive effort, the United States ultimately failed to achieve its objectives, leading to a humiliating withdrawal and the fall of Saigon. The Vietnam War was characterized by a series of intense and brutal battles, as well as a protracted and often frustrating counterinsurgency campaign. United States forces faced a determined and resourceful enemy in the Viet Cong, who employed guerrilla tactics and used the dense jungles of Vietnam to their advantage. The war also saw the extensive use of air power, with the United States conducting massive bombing campaigns in an effort to disrupt the enemy's supply lines and break their will to fight. However, despite these efforts, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces proved to be resilient and adaptive, continuing to wage war even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Vietnam War had a profound impact on American society, leading to widespread anti-war protests and a deepening sense of division within the country. The conflict raised fundamental questions about the United States government's foreign policy and the wisdom of its involvement in a distant and complex conflict. The war also exposed the limitations of United States military power, as the United States found itself unable to achieve a decisive victory despite its vast resources and technological superiority. The Tet Offensive of 1968, in particular, was a turning point in the war, as it shattered the illusion of United States progress and led to growing calls for an end to the conflict. The end of the Vietnam War came in April 1975, when North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. The fall of Saigon marked the end of the war and the unification of Vietnam under communist control. The United States, having withdrawn its forces in 1973, was unable to prevent the collapse of the South Vietnamese government. The images of the last United States helicopters evacuating personnel from the roof of the United States Embassy in Saigon became a powerful symbol of the failure of United States policy in Vietnam. The war had cost the lives of more than 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese, and its legacy would haunt the United States for decades to come. In the years following the Vietnam War, the United States underwent a period of introspection and reassessment of its foreign policy. The conflict had exposed the dangers of military intervention in complex and unfamiliar regions, and it led to a more cautious approach to United States involvement in foreign conflict. The Vietnam War also had a lasting impact on United States society, contributing to a sense of disillusionment and mistrust in government. The war's legacy continues to shape United States foreign policy and military strategy, as the lessons learned in Vietnam are applied to modern conflicts and challenges. The Vietnam War remains a powerful reminder of the costs and consequences of war, and its impact on American history cannot be overstated. 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs invasion, which took place in April 1961, was a failed attempt by Cuban exiles, supported by the United States, to overthrow the government of Fidel Castro in Cuba. The invasion was planned and executed by the Central Intelligence Agency CIA with the approval of President John F. Kennedy, who hoped to prevent the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere. However, the operation was poorly conceived and executed, leading to a disastrous outcome that would have significant repercussions for United States-Cuban relations and for Kennedy's presidency. The Bay of Pigs invasion was intended to be a quick and decisive operation, with the expectation that the Cuban people would rise up against Castro and support the exiles in their efforts to overthrow the government. However, the reality on the ground was very different. The invasion force, composed of about 1,400 Cuban exiles, was met with fierce resistance from Castro's forces, who were well prepared and had superior numbers. The invaders quickly found themselves outnumbered and outgunned, and their supply lines were cut off, leaving them without the necessary resources to continue the fight. Within 3 days, the invasion was crushed, and nearly all of the invaders were killed or captured. The failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion had significant political and diplomatic consequences for the United States. The operation was widely seen as an embarrassment for the Kennedy administration, which had underestimated the strength of Castro's regime and the level of support he enjoyed among the Cuban people. The invasion also damaged United States credibility on the international stage, as it exposed the extent of American involvement in covert operations to overthrow foreign governments. The failure of the invasion led to a period of intense soul-searching within the United States government, as officials sought to understand what had gone wrong and how to prevent similar failures in the future. The Bay of Pigs invasion also had a profound impact on United States-Cuban relations, leading to a deepening of the Cold War tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. In response to the invasion, Castro declared Cuba to be a socialist state and sought closer ties with the Soviet Union, which led to the deployment of Soviet missiles in Cuba and the subsequent Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. The crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war and underscored the dangers of United States intervention in the affairs of other nations. The Bay of Pigs invasion thus became a pivotal moment in the Cold War, with far-reaching implications for United States foreign policy. In the years following the Bay of Pigs invasion, the United States continued its efforts to undermine Castro's regime through a variety of covert operations, but none would achieve the desired outcome. The invasion's failure became a cautionary tale for future United States administrations, highlighting the risks and limitations of using military force to achieve political objectives. The Bay of Pigs invasion remains a significant event in United States history, not only for its impact on United States-Cuban relations, but also for its role in shaping the broader course of the Cold War. The lessons learned from the invasion continue to inform United States foreign policy and military strategy to this day. 1982 to 1984, the Lebanon Intervention. The Lebanon Intervention, which took place between 1982 and 1984, was a complex and ultimately tragic chapter in United States military history. The intervention began as part of a multinational effort to stabilize Lebanon, which was embroiled in a brutal civil war that had drawn in various factions, including Palestinian forces, Christian militias, and the Syrian military. The United States, along with France, Italy, and the United Kingdom, deployed peacekeeping forces to Lebanon in an attempt to restore order and facilitate the withdrawal of foreign forces from the country. However, the mission quickly became entangled in the broader conflict, leading to unintended consequences. The most devastating event of the Lebanon Intervention occurred on October 23, 1983, when a truck bomb exploded at the United States Marine Barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American servicemen. The attack, carried out by a group affiliated with Hezbollah, was one of the deadliest terrorist attacks against United States forces up to that time. The bombing shocked the American public and led to widespread questioning of the United States' role in Lebanon. The loss of life underscored the dangers of involvement in the region's complex and volatile conflicts, where clear objectives and exit strategies were often elusive. In the aftermath of the barracks bombing, the United States government faced a difficult decision about how to proceed in Lebanon. Some argued for a continued military presence to achieve the mission's original goals, while others advocated for a withdrawal to avoid further casualties in what was increasingly seen as an unwinnable situation. Ultimately, President Ronald Reagan decided to withdraw United States forces from Lebanon in February 1984. The decision was seen by some as a necessary step to protect American lives, but by others as a retreat that damaged United States credibility and emboldened its adversaries in the region. The Lebanon Intervention is often remembered as a failed mission that highlighted the limitations of United States military power in complex, asymmetrical conflicts. The intervention's original goals to stabilize Lebanon and facilitate the withdrawal of foreign forces were not achieved, and the United States' withdrawal left the country still mired in civil war. The experience in Lebanon also had a lasting impact on United States military strategy, leading to greater caution in future peacekeeping missions and a more skeptical view of the use of force in situations where clear objectives and exit strategies are difficult to define. In reflecting on the Lebanon intervention, it is clear that the mission, despite its noble intentions, was flawed from the start. The intervention was based on the assumption that a multinational peacekeeping force could bring stability to a country deeply divided along sectarian lines and beset by external influences. The barracks bombing and subsequent withdrawal of United States forces demonstrated the dangers of engaging in conflicts where the lines between combatants and civilians are blurred, and where the risks to American lives are high. The Lebanon intervention remains a cautionary tale in United States military history, one that continues to inform decisions about the use of force in complex and unstable regions. 1992 to 1994 The Somalia Intervention. The Somalia Intervention, which took place between 1992 and 1994, was initially conceived as a humanitarian mission to address a severe famine and civil war in Somalia. The United States, as part of a United Nations-led effort, sought to deliver food and aid to the Somali people, who were suffering from widespread hunger and violence. However, the mission quickly evolved into a military engagement as United States forces became involved in efforts to disarm local warlords and restore order in the country. The intervention ultimately culminated in the Battle of Mogadishu in October 1993, a bloody conflict that would become a defining moment in the United States' involvement in Somalia. The Battle of Mogadishu, also known as Black Hawk Down, was a disastrous operation that saw United States forces attempting to capture key lieutenants of Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. The mission quickly went awry when 2 United States helicopters were shot down by Somali militants, leading to a chaotic and intense battle in the streets of Mogadishu. United States soldiers found themselves surrounded and outnumbered, fighting for their lives in a hostile urban environment. The battle resulted in the deaths of 18 United States soldiers and hundreds of Somalis, and the images of American bodies being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu shocked the world. The failure of the Somalia intervention had profound consequences for United States foreign policy and military strategy. In the wake of the Battle of Mogadishu, President Bill Clinton ordered the withdrawal of United States forces from Somalia, bringing an end to the mission. The intervention, which had started as a humanitarian effort, had devolved into a violent and costly conflict with no clear path to success. The United States withdrawal from Somalia was widely seen as a failure, and it led to a period of introspection within the United States military and government about the risks and challenges of humanitarian interventions in unstable regions. The legacy of the Somalia intervention continues to be felt today, as it influenced United States decisions about military involvement in subsequent conflicts. The intervention highlighted the difficulties of conducting military operations in complex and chaotic environments, where the distinction between combatants and civilians is often unclear. The experience in Somalia also contributed to a more cautious approach to United States involvement in international peacekeeping missions, as the risks of becoming embroiled in protracted and costly conflicts became more apparent. The Somalia intervention remains a significant chapter in United States military history, one that serves as a reminder of the challenges and pitfalls of humanitarian interventions. In reflecting on the Somalia intervention, it is clear that the mission, despite its initial humanitarian goals, was ultimately unsuccessful in achieving its broader objectives. The failure to stabilize Somalia and the heavy losses suffered by United States forces underscored the limitations of military power in addressing complex and deeply rooted conflict. The intervention also highlighted the importance of clear objectives, exit strategies, and an understanding of the local context in any military operation. The lessons learned from Somalia continue to shape United States foreign policy and military strategy, as the United States seeks to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. 2003 to 2011 The Iraq War. The Iraq War, which lasted from 2003 to 2011, was one of the most controversial and consequential conflicts in recent United States history. The war began with the United States-led invasion of Iraq in March 2003, with the stated goal of toppling the regime of Saddam Hussein. and eliminating Iraq's alleged weapons of mass destruction (WMDs. The invasion was justified on the grounds that Iraq posed a significant threat to global security. But it quickly became clear that the intelligence used to support these claims was deeply flawed. Despite the rapid success of the initial military campaign, the subsequent occupation of Iraq would prove to be far more challenging and costly than anticipated. The Iraq War was marked by a series of significant challenges and setbacks for the United States and its allies. While the invasion succeeded in toppling Saddam Hussein's regime, the United States military quickly found itself grappling with a growing insurgency, fueled by sectarian tensions and resentment of the foreign occupation. The war also led to widespread instability in Iraq. As the country's fragile political and social fabric began to unravel, the United States military faced the daunting task of trying to stabilize a country that was descending into chaos, with daily bombings, kidnappings, and attacks on coalition forces becoming a grim reality. The long-term consequences of the Iraq War were profound and far-reaching. The conflict had a devastating impact on Iraq, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and the displacement of millions more. The war also strained United States relations with its allies and contributed to a growing sense of disillusionment and skepticism about United States foreign policy. The failure to find WMDs in Iraq undermined the credibility of the United States government and led to widespread criticism of the decision to go to war. The Iraq War also had significant implications for the broader Middle East, as the power vacuum left by Saddam Hussein's ouster contributed to the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. The withdrawal of United States forces from Iraq in 2011 marked the end of a long and costly conflict, but the legacy of the war continues to shape the region and United States foreign policy to this day. The war exposed the limitations of military power in achieving political goals and highlighted the dangers of intervening in complex and volatile regions without a clear plan for the aftermath. The Iraq War also raised important questions about the use of intelligence in making decisions about war and peace, as well as the role of the United States as a global superpower. In reflecting on the Iraq War, it is clear that the conflict had a profound impact on both Iraq and the United States. The war's human and economic costs were enormous, and its legacy continues to be felt in the region and beyond. The Iraq War serves as a reminder of the challenges and risks of military intervention and the importance of careful planning, clear objectives, and an understanding of the local context in any military operation. The lessons learned from the Iraq War continue to inform United States foreign policy and military strategy, as the United States seeks to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. 2001 to 2021, the war in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan, which spanned from 2001 to 2021, was the longest conflict in American history. The war began in the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, with the United States launching Operation Enduring Freedom to dismantle the Taliban regime and eliminate the al-Qaeda network responsible for the attacks. The initial phase of the war was marked by a swift and decisive military campaign that succeeded in toppling the Taliban government and disrupting al-Qaeda's operations. However, the subsequent occupation and efforts to rebuild Afghanistan would prove to be far more challenging and protracted. As the war dragged on, the United States military found itself increasingly bogged down in a complex and intractable conflict. The Taliban, though initially defeated, regrouped and launched an insurgency that would last for nearly 2 decades. The United States and its NATO allies faced the daunting task of trying to stabilize a country that was plagued by corruption, poverty, and deep-seated ethnic and tribal divisions. Despite the massive investment of resources and personnel, the United States was unable to achieve a decisive victory, and the war became a long and costly stalemate. The war in Afghanistan had a profound impact on both Afghanistan and the United States. For Afghanistan, the conflict led to significant human suffering, with tens of thousands of civilians killed and millions more displaced. The war also left the country in a state of perpetual instability, with the Taliban controlling large swaths of territory and the central government struggling to assert its authority. For the United States, the war became a source of growing frustration and disillusionment, as the costs of the conflict mounted and the prospects for a successful resolution dimmed. The United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 marked the end of the war, but also highlighted the limitations of United States military power. The rapid collapse of the Afghan government and the Taliban's swift return to power underscored the fragility of the gains made during the two-decade-long conflict. The chaotic scenes of the United States' evacuation from Kabul, including the desperate attempts by Afghan civilians to flee the country, became a powerful symbol of the war's tragic outcome. The war in Afghanistan, despite its initial objectives, ultimately failed to achieve lasting stability or security for the Afghan people. In reflecting on the war in Afghanistan, it is clear that the conflict had significant and far-reaching consequences for both Afghanistan and the United States. The war's human and economic costs were immense, and its legacy continues to shape the region and United States foreign policy. The war in Afghanistan serves as a sobering reminder of the challenges and risks of military intervention, particularly in complex and volatile regions. The lessons learned from the conflict continue to inform United States military strategy and foreign policy, as the United States seeks to avoid the pitfalls and mistakes of the past. As we've journeyed through the history of America's rare military setbacks, we've seen how each of these conflicts, from the War of 1812 to the Vietnam War, from the Somalia Intervention to the recent war in Afghanistan, has left its mark on the nation. These wars, though often remembered for their challenges and losses, have played a crucial role in shaping the United States and its approach to international conflict. Each of these moments in history reminds us that even the most powerful nation can face adversity, and that there is much to learn from both victory and defeat. The stories of these wars serve as powerful lessons in humility, resilience, and the complexities of global leadership. They also highlight the importance of reflection and understanding in navigating the future. While America's victories have defined its strength, its rare losses offer invaluable insights into the human cost of war and the ongoing pursuit of peace and stability. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of some of the most significant, yet lesser-known chapters in American history. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth historical content. Your support helps us continue to bring you these important stories. Until next time, thank you for watching.